This is a video to reinforce the process of starting still life painting. So in the beginning, everyone needs to stand when they paint. So I'm asking everyone to elevate the table easels and get used to standing. And this way you usually have more flexibility, more freedom to move across the surface of the canvas. And then when you're looking at the still life, there's a lot to choose from. So we're going to begin by using a viewfinder. The viewfinder is a very helpful tool to look and to isolate compositions and to spot and just to be selective. It allows you the clarity to pick and choose what you like, because there's a lot to look at and it's overwhelming at times. So I'm using just fine charcoal, or you can use a pencil, and actually a pencil would probably work better. You usually feel more comfortable holding a pencil. And we're going to begin with thumbnail sketches. So I'm asking people to do at least 3 thumbnail sketches of 3 different compositions. And using the viewfinder too, and in the assignment, each painting, the paintings you create must have at least 5 objects, a minimum of 5 objects. So as you're using the viewfinder, and as I'm looking through this, and also I might say the beauty of the viewfinder is that it allows you to focus and gives you a preview of how objects are going to sit on your picture plane. And if you notice too, I don't know if you can see this, I'm making a very small sketch. So the sketch, the benefit of the small sketch is that it's quick, there's no detail, I can make changes easily if I need to, I can even reformat the picture plane. And this gives me the freedom to knock this out without too much difficulty, and also without getting too obsessed with the small stuff. So I'm focusing on the dominant shapes of the objects, the light source, if there's any prominent cast shadows or value changes, and just trying to get the object in the picture plane, see what that looks like. So that's one composition. That took me less than a minute. So as I move around, I can isolate another view, frame it, begin sketching it, see what things look like. If I need to reformat, I can pull back or recalibrate the picture plane. And get something that at least tells me what the painting would probably look like when I got into it. And this will save a lot of grief later on, because you need to isolate things and find a view that's going to be interesting, objects that are interesting to you, and a scene or a selection of that's going to be interesting to you as a painting. If you crop in too much and you don't have a full figure or full object, that's a problem, because you won't be gratified. There will be no satisfaction in seeing like a whole bust or a vase or whatever. So try not to crop too much. So in like a composition like this, I can see the figure, I can see the bust, I can see the box it rests on. There's some odd objects, I admit, but you've got this hexagon, which is kind of neat, and you've got this big orange. There's a big orange on top that I'm drawing. So I want people to do at least 3, to begin with, 3 different compositions, different views of objects too, and also contrast vertical formats to horizontal formats and see what you come up with. And once you've selected a composition you're happy with, you're going to move on to your 16 by 20 canvas panel. And using vine charcoal, you're going to reproduce what you saw in your viewfinder. So I had one view down here that I liked, and I might add too that the beauty of vine charcoal, if you've never used it, is it's very soft, nothing's been added to it, and it makes changing very easy, or corrections or any kind of alterations. It makes it a lot easier to do compared to, let's say, pencil, because with pencil you can tend to maybe overwork things or get too involved in detail or put in too much or too heavy of a line that you'll regret, and then it's harder to erase. So the apt thing and the thing that's approachable or enjoyable about this is that it's easy to use and it's easy to make any changes or corrections. So the scene I'm looking at has a tomato, it has its face, the bust, it has its head turned, it's got a section of the flower, and then there's this large copper tea kettle here off to the left. So if you notice what I'm doing, I'm sticking to contours, and I want to make sure the drawing is correct, because this whole process of painting is going to be one of refinement. So even though if the sketch is somewhat crude here, as it progresses, it will start to become tighter and tighter and become more specific as the work progresses. So even here, I'm trying to get the perspective accurate. And as I like to say, when you get into paint, don't think, well, I'll just solve that when I start painting. Well, paint does not correct drawing issues. If there are drawing issues, they need to be corrected here, especially when it's in a stage where it's easy to make changes. It's very easy to correct, wipe out. If I needed to, I could wipe this out, start over again, and I've only spent like less than 2 minutes on this composition. So there is a little bit of caution in watching how you begin, getting your composition set up right, and getting everything to your liking before you start in with paint. So this gives me an idea of the placement of the objects, the dominant composition, the contour, and it gives me a place to begin based off of my thumbnail sketch, of course. So it gives me the start I need. So that's about it. That's about all I want to put down. I mean, you could put down more charcoal, but you'll see in a minute when I start doing the underpainting, this eventually will disappear. And this will go into kind of a liquid slurry, or it'll mix with the water and the paint and just disappear. And I'm also recommending to people at different stages, like at the beginning sketch, to photograph this. So you have a record. This way you have a record of what the drawing looked like. And then when I change this, you'll see in a few minutes, this is all going to go away. So it's good to see, and for your own record, what it looked like at this early point. Because in the painting process, we just forget. We tend to forget as people, what we did or how things worked out or how did I get there. So it just gives you a little indicator of the process. So you can repeat it again. So you will have, if you can't remember it, you can at least look back at your photographs. So now I'm ready to move on. And what I'm going to do, and what I recommend, is we're going to do a variation of something called a grisaille. And a grisaille, traditionally, is a monochromatic underpainting. So no color, usually one color. You can see in museums people who've done finished paintings like Bruegel and Van Eyck, these paintings that are beautifully finished, but they're just monochromatic, so black, white, and gray. But for you, I want you to use just burnt umber and white. So we're just using these two colors, and I'm going to be mixing them together, and I'm going to be using them in between for grays. So I have it on my palette paper. And if you can see, I'm just mixing up, I'm trying to liquefy this, and I'll be going now in, and I'm going to just reinforce the drawing. But I'm treating this more like a charcoal drawing. I'm treating this where I'm just looking to reinforce contour and reinforce value. Because traditionally a grisaille establishes a very solid structure. So the structure is the drawing and the value. So what's nice about this, what I like about grisailles, is that when you get into color, sometimes color can be distracting and you can really spend a lot of time using bright colors, but you distract from the structure of what holds it all together, which usually is value. So value holds things together, and then as we go into this process, we'll continue to build and add thinner layers on top, or thin layer on top of thin layer of color and paint. And we're allowing some luminosity to come through. So the first layers are going to be watered down, hopefully you can see that. Watered down, very translucent. But notice what it's doing to the charcoal too. It's liquefying it, and it's being replaced by a thin layer of acrylic paint. So as I work through this, I'm going to approach that and do that with everything that I'm seeing. So it's important to do the object, and it's also important to do the values that surround the objects. So as you would in a charcoal drawing, if you were doing this in charcoal, you wouldn't hesitate to do the background objects, or the objects resting behind them, the overall background color or value, just to get a tone down, to set down tone. Because the grisaille traditionally is the foundation or the framework that you're going to build on, and then add color on top of this. Also, notice how I'm not worried about detail. So even with this little figure, it's a little bust of a figure, I'm trying to just get the shape of the head and deal with the shadows. This is a shape, this is a shape, the pedestal the little figure is sitting on. And I could go back in and start to refine edges a little bit. A grisaille can be taken to just about any state of finish, from rough and crude to very, very polished, to very detailed. Also notice how I'm holding the brush. I'm grasping it more like this so I can use, again, more arm motion. So I'm kind of actually scrubbing. That scrubbing sound, I don't know if you can hear it, that's actually a good thing. Because I'm forcing the paint across the surface into the pigment or into the tooth. This is called the tooth. The texture of the canvas is the tooth of the canvas. I'm forcing that into the tooth of the canvas so that I have good application and good adherence. So it starts to look a little bit, hopefully it will, like a value drawing. So cast shadows. Also note how I'm using the side or the plane of the brush, as I would if this was a piece of charcoal. I'd be using the side of the piece of charcoal. If I need to erase something, if I don't want to use the brush, I can just wipe it out. And again, this is just beginning the stage of the structure, the composition, the value. And now that I'm replacing everything with charcoal or from charcoal into acrylic paint, it gives me my first layer of paint. And what I like to do too is I like to assign everything a value. So everything has a value. You know, there's such thing as local value. So the object, like in this case, I'm drawing the tea kettle, which is more of a medium tone. The bust is a light value. Everything has an assigned called local value. So I'm trying to give it that assignment. I'm trying to treat it as I see it. I'm also trying to leave any white areas or light objects the white of the canvas. So in this case, this little figurine, this is probably the whitest or the lightest thing in the painting. So I'm not afraid to leave this white or leave the base of the pedestal white, because that's the value I see. So this is really about assigning values, looking at values and trying to give everything its proper value, especially showing the differences, how one thing is different from another. This is a larger brush too I'm using. So try to cover up all the white of the canvas of everything that isn't a stark white or, as I said, your lightest value. And you can mix up various tones of brown or umber, but you're using just this one color. And this will take some work, and as I said, you can spend quite a bit of time on this to get a nice grisaille or a nice underpainting. So everything doesn't have to be crude and sketchy. I mean, you can get it to different layers of development. Here's one I did earlier, and I pushed the darks. This is the same little figurine. So you can see I'm really trying to carve out the fact that it's highlighted, surrounded by a darker shadow. And if by any chance you get too dark, you can always let this dry. You can always go back with pure white acrylic, and you can refine or reestablish your lights. So it's like getting the white of the canvas back. You can bring that back. And it's good to do this now, because as we get into the painting process, we're going to be layering thin coats of paint or color, thin veils of color on top of one another. We're not going to work too heavy or too thickly, and certainly not too dark. We're going to try to keep the colors light and transparent, or I should say translucent, so that you can see through them, and that we'll be building layer on top of layer, thin color on top of thin color. So in the end, the painting's going to have much more of a glow to it. And let me get this painting. This is a painting by a previous student. I don't know if you can see it, but in the end, the painting will have this translucency. So as we try to work thinly, I don't know if you can see this, but there are thin coats of paint, and you're still seeing through to the canvas. So the white of the canvas is called the ground. You're still, by putting thin color down, you're allowing light to penetrate these different layers, and they start to interact, they start to mix. All these different layers of colors mix with one another. That's because they're put down transparently or translucently. If you put too much on, you would lose that glow, you would lose that sense of light going through these layers of color. That's also why it's important to get that drawing established, because if you make mistakes, it's going to be harder to make the changes. You can always change or correct if you need to. And sometimes in painting, it's learning how to cover your mistakes that's very important. But it's important to build up slowly. So it's a very slow process. And as I like to say, it's like a Polaroid. If you remember Polaroid film, if you take a Polaroid, it usually comes out just blank, and then gradually you see the image come into focus. And it's very gradual, but it comes up to a sharp level collectively. The whole surface, so you notice I'm not trying to obsess with one area, but it all together comes up to a level of finish, and then brightness and clarity. So think of that analogy with your painting, that you're trying to develop it the same way. Here's another one I did that takes it to a little bit more of a finished state. I've actually tried to apply color, and this will be the next thing I do. I'll do a video of applying color. But this is pretty much, this is a different composition, but this is pretty much the way I saw it with these four objects. And I've tried to replace the vine charcoal with the monochromatic burnt umber and white, just to reinforce, to affect or address tones in the background. If something was light, to show the contrast of light and dark. And this gives me a pretty decent foundation. Like I said, if people want to take this further, you may, and you can. It's up to the person's personality and drawing skills too. But I would take this to a level of finish in just that one color, just brown and white, or two colors, it's the monochrome, before we get into color. So for the first class, no one has gotten into color. I don't expect anybody to get into color. So after this, the first class, you'll have the composition after the 3 studies. You'll start in vine charcoal on your canvas panel, and then you will begin using the monochrome as an underpainting and take it to a level of finish that you're comfortable with. And then the next step will be applying color, which is, this is a little preview, but I'll get into that next time. So hopefully that's a good place to start.